Hello, welcome to my first YouTube video. I am genuinely really excited. I thought today we could look at a commission and how I wax carve my work because I show this in part on TikTok, but what I really wanted to do is do a nice in-depth video on everything that I use to wax carve my pieces. I'm making an aquamarine and diamond commission for Emma, and the aquamarines are really saturated. They're very good quality stones, so they've got a beautiful colour to them. And the diamonds I'm using are cinnamon diamonds. They're natural, and that's my favourite. I love working with cinnamon diamonds. So the type of wax carving I use is called subtractive wax carving, which is where you remove wax away from a larger chunk of wax to create your design. And I really like this as a format of wax carving. It's easy for my brain to understand, and I think most people can conceptualize it. It's a great place to start. Without further ado, let's get into the video. So here are the aquamarines and diamonds all laid out, and the first thing I need to do is measure the width of them with my dividers and transpose this onto my wax tube. I cut this bit off with a wax saw frame, but something you need to be careful of is to keep turning the wax tube so that you don't get a diagonal line when you cut. To finish off this piece, I then file the sides of the wax disc because I need it to be nice and flat before I start making my design. And then once I'm happy with the wax disc, it's time to start thinking about sizing. Because this is a bespoke ring, I'm making it to the size of the client's finger, which is a size N for November. The wax comes in about a size I, so I need to size this up. There are lots of ways you can size up wax, but I really like using a wax blade because it burrs out the inside of the wax tube and slowly takes the size up to the size that you want. Then I keep doing this slowly until I eventually get to a size N, and I make sure that I regularly check the size against my ring stick so that I don't overshoot the size and end up with any problems. Once I have my ring size, I then go ahead and I get my deepest stone and I measure it and transpose this measurement onto the wax using the inside of the ring as the guide for my dividers. Then I just need to cut this excess wax off, again using my wax saw blade and saw frame. This is just excess wax that I won't need because the depth of the stone is far less deep than the depth of the wax ring, so it's useful to get all this excess wax off early so that it doesn't get in the way. Once I have cut off that excess wax, I go ahead and I file up the sides of the ring because once again the wax saw blade has left some pretty harsh marks in this ring and we need to get those out before we start our design. It's always good to have a nice flat surface and a nice clean surface when you're starting your ring. This is why we spend so much time on the foundation of the ring. It seems like it's a lot of wasted time sometimes, but it is important to have a ring exactly how you need it before you start working. Then I take a 2mm cone burr and I pop this in my hand drill, which are my favourite drills to work with, and I go ahead and just mark out where I'd like my stones to be. All of the stones in this piece are either 2mm or 2.5mm in size, so a 2mm cone burr is perfect as there is shrinkage once the wax is cast. Once I have all of my pilot holes here in the wax, I can go ahead and open up some of them so that they're big enough for the larger stones, and I do this with just a slightly larger drill bit that's appropriate for the size of the stones that I have. Then I go ahead and I use the sharp tip of the cone burr to trace out a shape that I like on the outside of these stones. I know that some people would prefer to use a scribe, but I feel like I have a lot of control this way, so that's why I decided to do it, and the line is nice and clear in the wax. Because this creates this clear white line, I think it's perfect for detail. I think if something is a simpler outline, such as just a straight line to mark a shank, then that's fine to use dividers or a scribe because you don't need the line to be so clear. And here is a perfect example of how much less clear a line is if you're not using a drill bit to create it. Then I go ahead and I use a large bud burr. I think this one is 5mm in size, and I just remove excess wax around my design. Because the design is quite wiggly, the bud burr fits perfectly into the indentations, but if you have a more detailed design, you're going to need a smaller drill bit, so it's always worth keeping in mind the tools that you're using for the job. Alternatively, you could use a saw blade and saw frame to cut out this design, but this might slip around, especially if there's not loads of excess wax either side of the design, which in this case there isn't. You need to be really careful and take your time when burring out a design, and once you're happy with it, you can go ahead and cut off excess wax around the shank, which is exactly what I'm doing here. It's okay to use your saw blade and saw frame to do this, as in this case the shank is a pretty straight line. Once I have the general shape of my ring, I go ahead and I go over it with my bud burr. Now at this point you could go over your piece with any tools that you think are appropriate to create your design, but for me, I want to create a fluidity to the piece. My pieces are inspired by Art Nouveau shapes, so I think it's quite important to have that fluidity and natural look to it. I continue like this just to give me this rough shape. This still isn't a very clear shape, it's still not exactly what it's going to look like, but I do this just so that I get a rough idea of my layout, and then I can go back in and I can drill out my stone holes, which are now smaller because I have taken away some of the wax. I can do this with exactly the same burrs as I used before, but this time I am aiming to do it with more accuracy so the stones fit perfectly and I can go ahead and start cleaning up my shape. I do this with a needle file, which does get a little bit clogged, so it's important to clean your files regularly after wax if you want to use finer files. This is a cut 2 file, which is quite fine for wax. And then I can use a small wax blade. You can use any wax tool you like, but this is the one I like, just to gently go over the top of the wax and remove any marks or any kind of edges or corners that aren't completely fluid for my design. And I carry on with this until I'm happy with the surface. So this takes a long time, but this is the last step. So this is what's going to give you a nice smooth wax. There are other ways you can smooth over the wax, which I can cover in another video, but this is the way that I choose to do it. And then this is the final wax with aquamarines and diamonds in it. I really hope you like this piece, and thank you so much for watching this video.